The chains were not enough to hold him, and the whole dungeon corridor was full of guards shouting my name, and the scarred prisoner I had fed for 4 months stood over me like a wall between me and every blade in that cell. I had gone down to leave, the way I always left, quietly, before the night guard's rounds, and this time he had not let me go. This time, when I turned for the stair, his hand had closed gently but immovably around my wrist through the bars, and I had understood, in the space of a single racing heartbeat, that something in that cell had just changed, forever, and that I had absolutely no idea what I had actually been feeding, night after night, for 4 long months. But that is very near the end of it, and a woman who tells you the end before she has earned it deserves to be turned off. Let me go back 4 months, to a bowl of thin gruel I was never supposed to carry down those stairs at all. I am Corva, and I am a scullery omega in the household of the Iron Territories, the lowest rank a wolf can hold, and still be permitted a place at the fortress at all. I scrub pots and carry slops and empty the ash from 100 hearths, and I have done this work since I was 14 years old, with no complaint, because a packless omega with no bloodline learns early that a place at the bottom of a great house is still a place, and a place is not nothing. A year before this story begins, the pack lost its king. Rurik of the Iron Territories, they said, had ridden out to answer a border skirmish, and never returned. Ambushed, his party slaughtered, his body never recovered from the ravine where the fighting was said to have happened. His cousin, Lord Vasili, a smooth and careful man who had long served as the king's own steward, took up the regency in the king's absence, promising to hold the throne steady until, if ever, a body or a certainty could be found. The whole territory grieved. I grieved too, in the quiet, distant way a scullery girl grieves a king she has never once been close enough to actually see. Some months after the regency began, whispers started below stairs about a prisoner kept in the old dungeon beneath the western tower. A captured rogue wolf, the guards said, too dangerous and too feral to execute cleanly, kept chained and silvered as a matter of caution while Lord Vasili's healers studied whatever madness had made the creature what it was. No one who worked in that household was permitted near the cell, except the 2 guards assigned to it, and those 2 guards. I noticed even before any of the rest of this began, always seemed strangely, disproportionately afraid of a creature they described, in the next breath as nearly broken and barely able to stand. I was sent down with the guard's own supper one evening, the regular servant having taken ill, and it was only chance, and my own stubborn nature, that made me notice, in passing, how little food went into the cell itself compared to what the guards carried down for their own meal. A bowl of thin grey gruel, half spoiled, shoved through a slot in the door as an afterthought. I did not think much of it that first night. I have never been able to think much of anything, though, when I see a creature being deliberately starved, whatever shape that creature wears, and I found myself, without quite deciding to, filling a second bowl from my own modest ration the following evening, and carrying it down after the guards had gone to their own supper upstairs. I did not expect to find what I found in that cell. I do not fully know what I expected. A snarling animal, perhaps, the wild, half-shifted thing the whispers described. What I found instead, chained in the deepest, coldest corner of that cell, was a man, enormous, scarred badly along one side of his face, and down his throat in a way that spoke of old fire or old violence, silver at his wrists and throat, that had clearly been there so long it had scarred into the skin beneath, and eyes that watched me cross that cold stone floor with an alertness no truly broken. Creature could have managed. He did not speak. I would learn, much later, exactly why, but that first night I simply assumed silence was the shape of whatever had been done to him, and I set the bowl within his reach and said, "Because I have never once in my life been able to leave a silence unfilled. You look like you could use company more than food, honestly. But I've only got the one bowl tonight. He watched me with an intensity I found unsettling and, absurdly, did not find frightening, and he did not touch the food until I had backed away toward the door. The way a starved and wary creature will only eat once it believes itself unwatched. I came back the next night, and the night after, and for 4 months, I carried down whatever I could spare from my own portion, and I sat on the cold stone, just out of his chain's reach. And I talked to him the way I have always talked to anyone who looked lonely enough to need it. The ordinary small chatter of my day, the kitchen gossip, the weather, the particular unfairness of the head cook's temper. He never answered, not once. In 4 months did that scarred prisoner say a single word back to me. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I was not doing it to be heard in return. I have wondered since whether some part of me already suspected there was more to his silence than simple brokenness, because I began, without quite admitting it to myself, to look forward to those evenings more than any other part of my day. If you want to know why a scarred, chained prisoner never once spoke back to the servant girl who fed him for 4 months, and what happened the night I finally learned why, then stay with me. Follow this one to the end. I believed a simple, sad story about a feral, forgotten creature for 4 months. It was the wrong story, and the truth of it nearly cost me my life the night I finally started asking the right questions. The silver at his throat, I would learn, was not merely a restraint. It was a particular old cruelty. A warded silver collar designed specifically to silence a wolf's voice entirely, human and beast both. A punishment reserved, in the oldest and darkest corners of pack law, for prisoners whose words were considered as dangerous as their teeth. I did not know that yet in those first months. I only knew that he watched me with an intelligence no simple rogue beast should have possessed, and that some nights, when I came down later than usual, I would find, scratched faintly into the dirt of the cell floor with what must have been a fingernail or a scrap of loosened stone, a single letter. I noticed it perhaps a month in, 1 letter, always in the same corner, always freshly made since my last visit, as though he were building towards something one small scratch at a time, in whatever brief unwatched hours the guards left him truly alone. I did not understand what he was doing. I assumed, at first, it was simply the restless mark-making of a mind starved for any occupation at all. By the 3rd month, I had counted 5 letters, always in the same order when I looked at them together, and something in me, slow and stubborn, began to itch with a suspicion I did not yet have words for. Lord Vasili himself found me in the lower kitchens around that time, which alarmed me more than almost anything else that had happened, because a regent has no ordinary business seeking out a scullery girl. "I hear you've taken an interest in our prisoner," he said, warm and reasonable, examining the row of pots I had been scrubbing with an expression of mild distaste. The guards mentioned it. "I want you to understand, out of genuine care for your safety, precisely what you have been keeping company with. That creature was captured after slaughtering 3 of my own border scouts with his bare hands. In a fit of rage, even his own former pack could not contain. He is kept silvered and chained not out of cruelty, but necessity. A mercy, in fact, that we have not simply put him down as any sane household would. I would hate for a soft-hearted girl to mistake pity for safety, and find herself alone in a cell with something that has already proven, quite recently, exactly what it is capable of." His voice was smooth, careful, and underneath it, I would only understand, much later, faintly nervous. "Perhaps it would be best for your own sake if you left the prisoner's care entirely to the guards from here on." I told him, because I did not yet know enough to do otherwise, that I would consider his counsel carefully, and I went back down that very night, because I have never once in my life let a smooth, careful warning talk me out of what my own eyes had already shown me. And my own eyes had shown me a starving, silenced, watchful man, not a slaughtering beast. I noticed, that night, something Lord Vasili's warning had not accounted for at all. Half buried in the straw at the very edge of the prisoner's reach, worn nearly smooth by months of his own hands turning it over in the dark, was a ring, plain iron on the outside. Deliberately, I would come to understand, disguised to look worthless. But when I turned it toward the single guttering torch by the door, I saw, faintly, beneath the grime, the unmistakable pressed crest of the Iron Territory's own royal seal. The very same seal I had seen stamped on every proclamation Lord Vasili's regency had issued in the year since the king's death. I looked at the prisoner, and he looked back at me, and something in his scarred, silvered face went very still and very afraid. Not of me, I understood at once. Afraid of what I had just found, and what it would cost either of us if the wrong person learned that I had found it. "This is the king's seal," I said very quietly, my whole body gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the dungeon's chill. "This is Rurik's own ring. Why does a rogue wolf slaughtering border scouts have the dead king's seal ring buried in his cell floor?" He could not answer me. I understood that now, watching him strain uselessly against the silver at his throat, his mouth working around a word that simply would not come, and I understood, at last, exactly what the collar had been built to prevent him from ever saying. That was the moment my simple pity, poor forgotten creature, starved and alone, cracked open entirely, and something colder and far more focused took its place. "You're not a prisoner Lord Vasili captured," I said slowly, working it through even as the words left me. "You're the king he told the whole territory was dead. He didn't lose you in a border ambush. He put you here. He's been ruling in your name for a year while you sat chained and voiceless, 4 floors beneath the very throne he stole." I looked at the row of letters scratched into the dirt, and I understood, finally, what they had been building toward all along. "You've been trying to write your own name. Every night. For months, because it's the one thing that Silver Collar can't stop you from doing with your hands, even if it stopped your voice." He nodded. Just once, slow and exhausted, and I saw, in his ruined, scarred face, something that had not been there in 4 months of my visits. Not gratitude, exactly, but the particular naked relief of a man who has finally, after unbearable silence, been understood. I did not sleep at all that night. I lay awake in my narrow servant's cot, working through the full monstrous shape of what I had just learned, that the whole territory's grief for a dead king was built on a lie, that a smooth, careful regent had engineered the ambush that supposedly killed him, that he had kept the true king alive, and silenced rather than simply finishing what the ambush had failed to do, because a captured, controllable king was, I began to understand, far more useful to Lord Vasili than a dead one, should he ever need to produce proof of life, or a signature, or a body to display at exactly the moment his own position required it. I went back the next evening with more than food. I brought a scrap of charcoal from the kitchen hearth, and a torn corner of an old ledger page, smuggled beneath my apron, and I passed them through the bars. "You can't speak," I whispered, "but you can write more than 1 letter a night now. Tell me everything. I don't care how dangerous it is. I've been feeding a king for 4 months without knowing it, and I am done letting Lord Vasili decide what the rest of us are permitted to understand." He wrote for the better part of an hour, in the guard's brief absence, his hand shaking with disuse and cold. And what emerged, in cramped, aching letters across that scrap of stolen ledger paper, was the whole quiet horror of it, the ambush staged by his own cousin's hired men, the silver collar fitted the very night he was dragged, half dead, into this cell. The year of careful, patient captivity built to look, from the outside, like the tragic aftermath of an honest border skirmish. I could not go to the guards. Obviously, they served Lord Vasili directly, and had likely known some part of the truth all along, given how disproportionately, specifically afraid of the prisoner they always seemed. I could not go to the wider household, because I had no proof beyond a half-buried ring and a scrap of shaking handwriting that any careful investigator could dismiss as a madwoman's fantasy or a desperate prisoner's manipulation. I understood, turning it over through another sleepless night, that I had exactly one thing Lord Vasili's whole careful architecture had never accounted for. I had been the one person, in an entire year, who had simply kept showing up. "I'm going to get you out," I told him the next night, though I had no earthly plan yet for how. "Or I'm going to get the truth out, at least, even if I can't manage both, but I need you to trust me with whatever time we have. Because I am the only person in this fortress who spent 4 months noticing you're not what they said you were. And I don't intend to stop noticing now that I understand why it matters." He wrote one more thing that night, slow and careful, before the guard's returning footsteps forced me to snatch the paper away and flee. "Thank you for feeding me before you had any reason to." I kept that scrap of paper against my chest the whole walk back to my narrow cot, and I understood, holding it, that whatever this had started as, it had become something else entirely, some months before I ever found the ring or noticed the letters, and I had simply been too careful, too used to being the lowest rank in the household, to let myself name it. Lord Vasili grew suspicious of my continued visits within the week, whether from the guards' reports or his own careful watchfulness. I never learned, and he moved to end the matter the only way a cornered clever man ever does. He ordered the prisoner's transfer to a more secure holding in the western reaches, further from the fortress and further, I understood at once, from any chance I might ever have again of reaching him. And he scheduled it for a night when the whole household would be occupied with a grand harvest feast in the great hall, so that no one would notice one heavily guarded cart slipping quietly out through the western gate. I went down to the dungeon that very evening, hours before the transfer, and told him plainly what I had learned. "He's moving you tonight, during the feast, so no one sees. I don't have a plan beyond getting you out of that cell before the cart comes, and I don't have any right to ask you to trust a scullery girl's plan over 4 floors of armed guards. But I'm asking anyway, because I would rather fail trying than let him disappear you a second time." I do not fully know, even now, how the rest of that night unfolded so quickly. I had brought, hidden beneath my apron, a stolen ring of keys from the under-steward's own belt, taken while he slept off the feast's early wine, and I fumbled through 4 wrong keys before the 5th turned the lock on the outer cell door, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the whole ring twice. I could not free him of the silver itself. I had no tool for that, and no time to search for one. But the outer chains binding him to the wall gave way, and I understood, the moment they did, exactly why Lord Vasili had needed the silver collar, specifically, and not merely the chains to hold him. A year of starvation and silence had not broken what he actually was. We had perhaps 3 steps toward the stair before the night guard rounded the corner and saw the empty cell, and his shout brought every armed man on that level running within moments, and I understood, in the space of a single racing heartbeat, that I had freed a king only to have us both cornered in a dungeon corridor with nowhere left to run. That is the moment I began this story with. His hand closing gently but immovably around my wrist as I turned, desperate, for a stair I already knew we would not reach in time. He did not let me run alone into whatever those guards intended. He put himself, silvered and voiceless and half-starved, between me and the first blade that reached us, and I watched. In the flickering torchlight of that narrow corridor, the true king of the Iron Territories take a guard's strike across his own already scarred shoulder, rather than let it reach me. His wolf finally, after a year of silver-forced suppression, surging up through the pain and the collar both, in a way I would not have believed possible if I had not seen it happen with my own eyes. The collar cracked. I do not know if it was the strain of the blow, or a year of quietly weakening under whatever patient will he had been exerting against it in private, unwatched hours, or simply that some bonds cannot hold forever against a king defending what he has decided is his to protect. It cracked and fell, and for the first time in a year, Rurik of the Iron Territories had his voice back, and he used it the way I imagine he had been longing to for months. Enough, he said, and the single word rang down that stone corridor with a force that stopped every guard cold, because they knew that voice, whatever careful story they had been told to believe about the creature it belonged to. I am your king. I have been in this cell for a year on my own cousin's order. And any man in this corridor who lays a hand on this woman again answers to me directly, the moment I have use of my own throat back to say so. The guards did not know what to do with a silvered prisoner who had just spoken with the unmistakable authority of the king they had all sworn to a year before. Several of them, I would learn later, had genuinely believed the story of a captured feral rogue, and the sound of that voice, plainly royal, plainly furious, broke something in their certainty faster than any argument I could have made. Lord Vasili arrived in the chaos of it himself, drawn from the feast by the shouting, and I watched the whole careful architecture of his year-long lie collapse the instant he saw his cousin standing, bleeding but upright, in that dungeon corridor with his voice restored. "This is not possible," Vasili said, and his composure, built over a year of careful regency, cracked entirely in front of the very guards he had trained to fear a fiction. "It is entirely possible," Rurik said, "because you built a lie you never expected to survive contact with a woman too stubborn to accept it. You silvered my throat so I could never name you, cousin, and you very nearly succeeded, for a year. But you never accounted for someone simply showing up, night after night, with no motive beyond kindness, until she noticed what you had hoped no one ever would. Lord Vasili was taken before the full court within the week, and the whole monstrous shape of it laid bare. The staged ambush, the year-long captivity, a regency built on the corpse of a lie that had, in the end, never actually needed a body at all. He was stripped of every title and exiled under the gravest writ the territories had issued in a generation, and I am told he did not go quietly. I did not need to watch it to be satisfied. Rurik came to me in the aftermath, in the great hall where the harvest feast had been so rudely interrupted, his shoulder freshly bound, his voice still rough with a year's disuse, and he knelt in front of the whole recovering court, which scandalized nearly everyone present far more than his sudden resurrection had. "For 4 months," he said, and his voice, rebuilding itself with every sentence, filled that hall the way I imagine it once had before the silver ever touched him. A scullery girl fed a starving, voiceless prisoner out of nothing but pity, never once knowing who he was, never once asking anything in return. I scratched my own name into a dirt floor 1 letter at a time, because it was the only defiance the silver could not take from me, and she was the only person in an entire fortress who noticed, and cared enough to ask what it meant. His hand found mine, and it was shaking, though whether from the wound or something else I could not say. I do not know how to properly court a woman after a year in chains. I only know that you kept coming back long after any sensible person would have stopped, and that I spent every one of those evenings, silent and starved, falling in love with a voice I was never permitted to answer. Stay, now that I finally can ask you properly. I stood in the great hall with a bleeding king on his knees before me, and I did the only thing I have ever known how to do, which is tell the truth. I felt sorry for the prisoner no one else would feed, I said, and the whole recovering hall leaned in to hear the scullery girl answer the king. I had no idea who I was feeding. I'm not certain it would have changed anything if I had known. I've never much cared about rank when someone's simply hungry and alone. I let him see me smile, though my hands were still shaking from the whole terrible night. So I suppose the truth is, I didn't choose to fall for a king. I fell for a silent man who scratched his own name in the dirt because no one had left him anything else to hold on to. It turns out, those were the same person the whole time. He kissed me then, gently, mindful of his healing shoulder. One breath. No more. A kiss that said a whole sentence and did not need to become a scene, and what broke open in me was not the thing the songs promise. It was recognition, plain and total. The vertigo of being the one voice a silenced king had spent a year listening to, and choosing, the very moment his own voice returned, to use it first for me. His wolf, restored fully now that the silver was gone, pressed its great head against my side, warm and unafraid, and the court that had gathered to watch a lie finally collapse, watched instead the true king of the Iron Territories claim, at long last, the one woman who had never once needed to know his name to decide he was worth feeding. Here is the part I kept for last. The dirt floor. They have left that old cell exactly as it was, at Rurik's own order, the chains removed, but the scratched letters still visible in the packed earth where he wrote them one at a time across a year of silence. R-U-R-I-K. His own name, built one stolen night at a time. The single defiance a silver collar could never quite take from him. I go down sometimes still. Not to grieve it, but because it is the truest monument I know to the fact that a person can be silenced and still refuse entirely to disappear. A year on, I am the Luna of the Iron Territories, which still strikes me as a fortune too large for a scullery girl who once measured her worth in how many pots she could scrub before supper. My hands still shake sometimes, in cold weather, from that last desperate night with the stolen keys, and I have never once been sorry for the trembling. A letter came last week from the under-steward whose keys I stole that night. Writing now, very carefully, to ask whether the theft might finally be forgiven, given how it turned out. I had Arik write the reply, since my hand for letters is poor from a life spent scrubbing instead of writing. I did not gloat. Gloating and grace wear the same coat, in my experience, and it is hard to tell them apart from a distance, easier up close, where you can see which one is smiling. I confirmed the theft was long forgiven, and added that he might consider it the one theft in the history of this fortress that actually returned something stolen in the first place. Rurik found me sealing that letter at his own table, in the seat at his right hand, his wolf a warm weight across both our feet, his voice, fully mended now, reading over my shoulder. "What are you telling him?" the king asked. "The truth," I said. That she felt sorry for the prisoner no one else would feed. She had no idea who she was feeding. I looked toward the western tower, where a name still waited, scratched in packed earth, for anyone who cared to read it. It turns out that not knowing was the whole reason it worked. If I'd known you were the king, I think I'd have been too careful to just talk to you the way I did. I'm glad I never found out until it no longer mattered. So before I let you go, tell me what you think, because I have turned it over for a year and I still cannot settle it fully. Do you believe some part of him recognized the bond the very first night I came down those stairs, silenced as he was, unable to say a single word about it? Or do you think it grew slowly? Ordinary evening by ordinary evening, until neither of us noticed exactly when simple kindness became something else entirely. Tell me your theory below. I have decided, in the end, that I like not knowing exactly when it started nearly as much as I like knowing how it ended. And if you want to stay with us, the letters still scratched in that old cell floor, the fortress finally free of its careful year-long lie, Whatever quiet kindness still needs offering in this kingdom's forgotten corners, comment the wolf and follow along. Because I have learnt that showing up, night after night, with no motive beyond pity, can undo a lie an entire territory believed for a year. Where are you listening from tonight? Come sit with me a while. I promise, whoever you are, I will keep showing up.